The president's speech draws strong reaction. Tonight, religious groups share their response to the State of the Union. Remembering terror attack victims, the Pope offers his prayers while asking for ours. U.S. sailors freed from Iran, the saga of their capture and release diffusing a potential international crisis. And a major shakeup in the NFL, how team moves affect sports fans across the country. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, January 13th, 2016.
It's one of the few regrets of my presidency that the rancor and suspicion between the parties has gotten worse instead of better.
We need to accept that we've played a role in how and why our government is broken. And then we need to fix it.
South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley delivering the Republican response to President Obama's State of the Union address. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick, and we have comprehensive coverage of the State of the Union and reaction tonight. Our chief White House correspondent and political director Lauren Ashburn was there.
Yes, I was. From inside the chamber last night, the partisan rancor was clear. Looking down on the crowd from the gallery, it showed Democrats bouncing up and down, cheering and clapping, while Republicans only stood in unison to salute our troops.
The President of the United States.
And with that, President Obama entered the House chamber for his final State of the Union speech, glad-handing along the way.
Let's bring this to order.
He began with a call to work together on criminal justice reform and quickly pivoted to his successes and his opponents' criticism.
Anyone claiming that America's economy is in decline is peddling fiction. Well, so is all the rhetoric you hear about our enemies getting stronger and America getting weaker. And our answer needs to be more than tough talk or calls to carpet bomb civilians. That may work as a TV soundbite, but it doesn't pass muster on the world stage.
From the most powerful podium in American politics came a plea to change business as usual in Washington.
We need to reject any politics that targets people because of race or religion.
And he bolstered his position by invoking the pontiff, saying, "His Holiness Pope Francis told this body from this very spot I stand tonight that to imitate the hatred and violence of tyrants and murderers is the best way to take their place." These sentiments were echoed in the Republican rebuttal by South Carolina's Governor Nikki Haley.
During anxious times, it can be tempting to follow the siren call of the angriest voices. We must resist that temptation.
Nikki Haley speaking out and saying some things that might not please even Republicans. Is she the only one that seems to side with the president that we need to end partisan fighting?
It seemed that way. It really did, although I'm sure there were others. But when I was in Statuary Hall, which is the hall right off of the floor, all of the senators come in and are interviewed by TV cameras. All of the Republicans were attacking the Democrats, and the Democrats were attacking the Republicans. Even Senator Ed Markey said, "I think I want to change the Constitution so that Barack Obama has another 4 years."
Oh, my. So the rancor continues. Were you surprised by anything in this speech?
I was. I have covered the White House for the last week and a half, and they have had the drumbeat of gun control. Executive actions were issued. Nothing about gun control in the speech at all. And that to me was shocking. The second thing that I found interesting was that he didn't reference the First Lady's box at all with all of the guests that she had there. He usually says, "and my wife, Michelle." And this was very much I think a speech toward the audience and an optimistic one.
So you've covered these speeches before. What was the atmosphere like? Was it different this time?
It was, and it was because this was the last and final moment for Barack Obama. He left the room, turned around, looked, waved, and said, "I want to take one last look at this thing," because you know what? He's on his way out.
But you said earlier you could also feel the tension.
Oh, it was terrible. It is very much why the country is divided. Because you look at this room, I was right above the president looking over, and on this side, the Republicans were cheering and cheering, and
the Democrats
oh my gosh, watch
That's
it.
right.
The Democrats were cheering, and on this side, the Republicans were sitting sort of like this and not. You know why Congress's approval is at 13%, because nobody is really getting along.
Lauren Ashburn, thank you. And Lauren and our team very busy late into the night gathering reaction to the speech. Jason Calvi brings us that part of the story.
In a deeply divided Congress.
His speech was about America, if we come together, there is nobody that can contend with us. And America, we are the strongest country on earth.
It's no surprise Democrats praise the State of the Union.
The president celebrated a lot of what we've accomplished, cutting the deficit by 3/4, the auto industry having its greatest year ever, more people on health care, millions more.
While Republicans are colorfully critical.
It was lots of, unicorns and rainbows, but no nuts and bolts.
The national debt over his time in office has gone from roughly $10 to roughly $20 trillion. There was no acknowledgement of that.
I sit on both Foreign Relations and the Intelligence Committee, and to say that our standing in the world has been enhanced just defies reality.
The thesis of the close and of the end, right? Kindness, we have to be kind, and we need unconditional love, right? So that's all great, right? That's your thesis. But then the rest of the speech, you can't be giving left hooks and jabs and body blows to Republicans.
But Republicans aren't all critical, including the fourth-ranking Republican in the House.
I was really pleased to hear, actually, was the commitment that I think that we can do in a bipartisan way to end cancer once and for all.
Also in the hall, County Clerk Kim Davis, who was jailed for refusing to give marriage licenses to same-sex couples. My exclusive interview with her coming up. Brian?
Jason Calvi, thank you. There were 2 deliberately empty seats for the State of the Union address. President Obama arranged for one to represent the victims of gun violence. Iowa Republican Steve King left his own seat empty, symbolizing babies lost to abortion. He went to the Congressional Chapel to pray during the president's speech. The Little Sisters of the Poor were invited by Speaker Paul Ryan to attend the speech. They're in a legal fight with the Obama administration about its mandate to provide contraceptives to employees. The president did not recognize them, by the way. Religious groups have mixed reaction to the president's message. Family Research Council President Tony Perkins says President Obama's faith in Washington is far greater than his faith in the American people. He calls for national unity in the same breath that he lauds same-sex marriage, the single most divisive Supreme Court decision since Roe v. Wade. Nihad Awa, the National Executive Director of the Council on American Islamic Relations, says we welcome President Obama's strong rejection of Islamophobic rhetoric in politics. In South Carolina, Governor Nikki Haley, delivering the Republican response, stressed the GOP's commitment to religious liberty.
We would respect differences in modern families, but we would also insist on respect for religious liberty as a cornerstone of our democracy.
Haley says after the mass shooting at a church in Charleston, people didn't turn against each other's race or religion, they turned to God. Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. 10 Navy sailors held captive by Iran overnight are now free. Their detainment in the Persian Gulf sparked some tense moments between Tehran and Washington. Wyatt Goolsby is here with that story.
Brian, Secretary of State John Kerry says he's pleased the sailors were safely returned to U.S. custody this morning. He credits their quick release to ongoing diplomatic talks.
This kind of issue was able to be peacefully resolved and efficiently resolved, and that is a testament to the critical role that diplomacy plays in keeping our country safe, secure, and strong.
Just hours after welcoming Iran's release of 10 detained U.S. sailors, Kerry says Iran will likely be in compliance with a landmark nuclear deal within days. The service members were taken into custody after they reportedly drifted into Iranian waters in the Persian Gulf Tuesday. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard says the sailors were treated well and questioned if they were on an intelligence mission. Right now, the U.S. officials are investigating whether a problem with the boat's navigation system was to blame for the sailors crossing the border. Svi Khan, with the Foreign Policy Initiative in Washington, says what most people didn't know is what happened after the sailors were set free. Iranian state TV aired footage of the service members with their hands behind their heads.
Iran, on the other hand, is saying, no, we are in charge, and we are going to go out of our way to humiliate you.
Khan says while the White House says relations are good, it's obvious there are still problems, like Iran's foreign minister calling for the U.S. to apologize.
Some say the sailors being released quickly helped defuse what could have escalated into an international crisis, something Iran doesn't want just days ahead of a deal that lifts billions of dollars in sanctions. Brian?
Thank you, Wyatt Goolsby. An explosion in Pakistan kills at least 14 people. The government there says most were police officers. They were at a polio vaccination center in the city of Quetta. Islamist militants are claiming responsibility. They're reportedly being targeting polio workers in Pakistan. They claim the CIA used the vaccination program as a cover in its search for Osama bin Laden. Turkish police make an arrest, possibly linked to the deadly suicide bombing that killed 10 Germans in Istanbul's main tourist district. Police are saying little about the suspect detained in Istanbul late Tuesday. Turkish authorities identify the suicide bomber as a Syrian born in 1988. He had recently entered Turkey and had links to ISIS. Pope Francis invites those gathered at the Vatican for his weekly audience to pray for the victims of Tuesday's attack in Istanbul.
Che il Signore, il misericordioso, dia pace eterna ai defunti.
The Holy Father asking God to grant eternal rest to the deceased, consolation to the relatives, and to convert the hearts of the violent. Our Rome producer Mary Shovlain joins us from just outside St. Peter's Square. Mary, the Holy Father uses the general audience to teach. What is he beginning to focus on today?
Today, the Holy Father began a whole new series of catecheses devoted to mercy, which, of course, no surprise, here we are at the beginning of the Year of Mercy. He began exploring the biblical roots of the very word mercy, saying it was God himself in the book of Exodus who said, I am mercy. He had talked about the Hebrew word for mercy, which evokes a very visceral and tender motherly care for one's child. So evoking this very merciful, tender side of God when speaking of mercy. When he spoke about God's love, he made the point once again that God's love is not something like we see in a soap opera. God's love is the one that takes the first step, he said. This is the one that goes beyond our conflicts, beyond our anger. And he said it goes beyond evil, even to the point of being able to conquer and overcome evil.
Now, he invites us to turn to God with all of our hearts. Sounds wonderful, but how does he suggest we practically do that?
Let's start with confession, he says, and the power of asking for God's forgiveness. Even from day one of his pontificate, we remember, he said, it is not God who tires of forgiving us, it is we who tire of asking for forgiveness. He also offers other very concrete suggestions for the Year of Mercy, do the corporal works of mercy and the spiritual ones, and we can also gain indulgences by visiting the sick, clothing the naked, and so on. So there's many ways to do works of mercy and also gain the indulgence during the Holy Year.
And finally, with the Powerball jackpot at $1.5 billion, tell us about the Vatican's own lottery and how it's a little different.
All the proceeds from this lottery go to charity. If you want a Vatican lottery ticket, they're about €10 each, $11. They're all old gifts that the Holy Father has received. He received so many gifts throughout the year that he gives them to charity. And he thought, why not make this something that we can auction off, make a lottery out of it? And this year, the proceeds, all of them, will go to help refugees and the homeless.
Mary Shovlain from Rome. Thanks, Mary. Coming up, backlash to the President's State of the Union address. Which points are causing the most concern? And helping those in need. We visit a Jesuit coffee farm in Colombia to see how one program makes a difference. After starting the day on the upside, intense selling drives the stock market way down this afternoon. The Dow losing 364 points, the Nasdaq closing down 159. Thanks for joining us this Wednesday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. President Obama boarding Air Force One earlier. He goes to Omaha, Nebraska today, then on to Louisiana tomorrow. Both states tend to lean Republican. He'll likely echo his State of the Union message and possibly tout the 2.5 million people in those two states that have signed up for Obamacare. Well, we now know who invited Kim Davis to the State of the Union. After first denying it, Freedom Caucus Chairman Jim Jordan's office later admits they did. Our Jason Calvi was the only one to sit down with Davis after the president's speech.
I did agree with one remark that he made about we have to stand strong, help those that are less fortunate. And, I think that is the basis of the Christian faith is the brotherly love,
Was there anything that you particularly didn't like what the president said tonight?
He had made the statement that everybody was free to marry who they love. And, of course, that's the stand that I stood against. And it was not, for me, it never was a gay or a lesbian issue. It was about standing up for the Word of God. And as God had defined marriage from the very beginning, is between one man and one woman. And that's what I stood for.
One of the points he mentioned was about Islam. Were you surprised that he brought that up?
Oh, no. One of the things that he focused on was that we should not discriminate against Muslims or, you know, and persecute them. But he never once said anything about the people of the Christian faith who are being so tried and tested and being mashed down, literally, with his agenda.
Kim Davis with our Jason Calvi at the Capitol last night. Meanwhile, Mike Lillis, is with us in the studio. Mike is a senior reporter for The Hill. Mike, how does this situation play here in Washington surrounding this State of the Union address?
Washington, under this president, has been a highly polarized place, very partisan, and a speech like this fits directly into that mold. These speeches are always very partisan, very scripted, very predictable. Democrats are going to cheer everything he says. Republicans are going to rail against everything he says, and no difference this time around. What was different, I think, this time around, and Obama said this at the outset, he said, I'm not going to get very specific into the weeds policy-wise. This is the last year. We know that not much is going to get done on Capitol Hill. So I'm going to keep the issues kind of broad, very sweeping terms. And that gave people a lot less to attack from the Republican side and to cheer from the Democratic side. So there was that difference in tone, but in terms of the scope of government, what's the role of the government in your life, those things haven't changed, and again, very partisan, nothing changes.
Republicans debate one more time tomorrow night. What parts of the speech will give them fodder for their debate?
Well, again, without all the policy specifics, they're not going to have individual things to go after. I think the exception to that will be the foreign policy issues. This speech came while the 10 naval officers were still being held by the Iranians. And of course, the Republicans see that as a very, as an indictment of his foreign policy. They've said all along that the Iran nuclear deal is a disaster for the Middle East, for Western security. Those themes will continue. The Republicans candidates have it very easy. They're running, trying to energize the conservative base, who of course don't like this president at all. They can attack everything that he does, and you can expect them to do that. The Democrats have a much more delicate line to walk, and that's because they agree with most of what Obama says, but they're also trying to distance themselves from him on issues like trade, for example, that's anathema to the liberals that they're trying to energize. And their debate's coming up as well. So that's something to look out for a couple days from now.
Mike Lillis with The Hill. We appreciate you, Mike. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Up next, major moves for the NFL. Which teams are leaving their fans behind? And journey to South America. How our sacrifices can help Colombian coffee farmers face difficult challenges. Here I am, Lord, I come to do your will. The response to today's responsorial psalm. Thanks for joining us this Wednesday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. It's the 13th of January, and as cities of both sides of the U.S.-Mexico border prepare for Pope Francis's visit to Juarez, visitors are warned about scams. The Diocese of Ciudad Juarez will give some tickets to El Paso parishes for the scheduled open-air Mass February 17th. Mass tickets are not for sale, and visitors are warned against buying any tickets. A live video feed will be streamed at El Paso Sun Bowl for those who can't get into the Mass. Lisa Hendey of CatholicMom.com joining us by Skype from Pasto in the Department of Nariño, Colombia. What brings you to South America, Lisa?
Brian, it's such an honor to be here as a guest of Catholic Relief Services on a CRS media junket, a delegation of media professionals that are here to see the work of Catholic Relief Services in this amazingly beautiful country.
You're at Villa Loyola. That's a Jesuit-owned coffee farm. How do they combine ministry with coffee?
It's a very interesting combination of providing work in a way that's meaningful, provides dignity for the families that serve here, but also is done in terms of the church's teachings on something as important as climate change. So you see here the mixing of ecology and economy in a way that's uplifting the lives of these Colombian families.
Did you also get to meet with the bishop there?
We did. We met last night with Bishop Enrique, who is of the Diocese of Nariño, and he gave us a very important overview of the church's presence in this country, especially now during the peace accords that are going on, the place of the church and serving families and being a broker in the peace process, a great presence and a great respect for the church here in Colombia.
Lisa, Lent begins at exactly 4 weeks. Can you talk a little bit about how the Rice Bowl Initiative combines those 3 principles of Lent: prayer, fasting, and almsgiving?
Rice Bowl, of course, is an important nationwide program, and Colombia is one of the beneficiary countries of our Rice Bowl gifts. So when we at home make small sacrifices, when we pray in solidarity with the church, and when we give of our gifts, we support families like those that we met on a coffee farm yesterday here in Colombia. Fidencio is growing beautiful, wonderful coffee, and our Rice Bowl funds go to help him create a better lifestyle for his family and serve them in a way that'll go on for the future of his family as well.
And I know they face many challenges, and we appreciate you taking us a little bit closer to that situation in Colombia. Lisa Hendey with CatholicMom.com. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Brian.
For the first time in nearly 20 years, the NFL votes to allow a team to relocate. The St. Louis Rams will move to a new stadium outside Los Angeles. The San Diego Chargers have the option to share that new facility. The Oakland Raiders could also move back to LA, but only if the Chargers opt out. The Raiders and Rams both left LA after the 1994 season. Doug Eldridge is a sports agent, managing partner of the DLE agency. He's our go-to guy when it comes to stories like this. So LA is the second largest media market. I'm sure that played into this decision.
Oh, it had a tremendous impact. New York is obviously the largest media market, but it's the MMR. Media dictates marketing, dictates revenue. And when we look at LA, right, first of all, let's look at the NFL. 2 of the top 6 teams in terms of estimated total worth are based in New York, 2 of the top 6. And in the NBA, a comparable, 5 of the top 7 teams are based in either New York or LA. And when we look at these 3 teams that were under consideration today, the St. Louis Rams, the Oakland Raiders, and
the Chargers,
and of course the San Diego Chargers, you're talking about the 6th, 21st, and 28th media markets. But what that translates to is the 22nd, 28th, and 31st most valuable teams. The point? Media market has a direct impact on the value of the team.
So at one time, the Rams and the Raiders were in LA. They're now looking at going back there. This was a divided decision, though. What did it take for the league to accept it?
Well, I almost liken it to a watch, right? On the face of the watch, you have the second, the hour, and the minute hand. They all move smoothly together. But if you flip the watch over and look at all of the intersecting gears, and it's an incredibly complicated and difficult process. If we're talking about relocating a billion-dollar franchise a time zone away to the second largest media market, there's a litany of things that go into this decision. Now, as that impacted the vote today, there was an initial vote of 6 owners that voted 5-1 in favor of the Carson proposal, which was the one associated with the Raiders and the Chargers. When that was then taken back to the overall 32 owners, they flipped that decision. They did not take the recommendation of the steering committee, instead voting in favor of the Rams proposal. Initially 22-10, then 21-11, and then when it went to public voting, a decided 30-2 vote in favor of the Rams proposal. Now, there's a lot that goes into that, not the least of which is the fact that Kroenke, the Rams owner, really positioned and packaged this brilliantly. He didn't focus on the team moving there. He focused on the facility and the value that would have for the other 31 owners of the 32 that make up the league.
Man.
Right? Now, the facility itself was an estimated $2.6 billion and won't be ready until 2019. But many insiders say that was ultimately what swayed such a decided ultimate vote.
Finally and quickly, what about St. Louis? They lost the Cardinals. Now they're losing the Rams.
Well, St. Louis has essentially accepted that at least for the 2016 season, they're not going to have a team. The question is, how long are they going to lay dormant? The longest in NFL history was the Rams in Los Angeles. They left in '95, returning in '16. That was 21 years. The second longest was 12 years in Baltimore when the Colts left and then came back. And the third, ironically, was one of these cities that we're talking about, St. Louis, when the Cardinals left and then returned as the Rams. So, whether it's 21, 12, 7, or some other number, what we do know is decidedly the St. Louis is going to be without, unfortunately, an NFL team for a while.
We'll wait and see. Doug Eldridge, thanks.
Thank you.
And thanks for watching tonight. I'm Brian Patrick as we leave you with these intimate moments between the Holy Father and pilgrims at the general audience today.